So, shall we kick off with the Virginia Giuffre's memoir, Nobody's Girl?
Absolutely. Incredibly moving. And one of my first thoughts on it is that it really shows her as the committed advocate. So many times when we speak about Epstein victims, Epstein survivors, I don't think we give the sense of work and agency and rigor its due. And yes, this is a co-authored book, but the footnoting, the rigor, the how much it chronicles what she did in order to have everything we know about the Jeffrey Epstein story into the public view. It's her lawsuits against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell that arguably started the entire ball
Yeah,
rolling on the criminal prosecutions. It was her lawsuit against Prince Andrew. It was a lawsuit she joined against some major banks that have started the follow the money story. And the kind of insights that this book gives into the work of her and other survivors in bringing that story to the forefront and start in her own personal story. This is before getting into the very wrenching and moving descriptions. It doesn't start out with Epstein, of course. It starts out with her family life. Although there's an introduction and describing her participating in the investigation of Jean-Luc Brunel, and we can talk about a number of the names that are either
yeah,
alluded to or stated in
yeah,
the book. But one thing that I found very striking, all of that is getting a lot of attention. I'm sure we're going to talk about all of that.
yeah,
But one thing that I think hasn't gotten its due focus, and she describes, I wrote a post about it on All Rise News, a warrior with a story to tell. And the word warrior, the kind of agency, the sense of mission, the sense of purpose, uh, most of the time there's so much public discussion and public discourse about what she experienced and what people like Epstein did and the names and the Epstein files. But her action, her activity, her litigation, her advocacy through SOAR, the organization that she established, I think that this book can give people a grounding into the very work that she did that created so much of what we know about this story. And with that introduction, I'll hand it to you.
Well, no, I agree with all of that, Adam. I mean, first of all, it's an incredibly difficult book to read. And for that reason, ironically, it's completely compelling. I think that what what is so powerful about it is that she's very real in talking about her vulnerability. She doesn't sugarcoat anything, including, I think, what a toll this took physically on her. I mean, at the end of the book, she writes about how she's come so far she's Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, then died. Ghislaine Maxwell was put behind bars. She gets Prince Andrew to settle with her. She's got SOAR, as you say, finally going, but the toll that it's taken on her body. She's in hospital, in and out for, chronic neck pain, an infection in her thigh. And she talks about how twice, towards the end, she did try to commit suicide. And she talks about the fact that at one point, her husband turns to her and says, what's it going to be? Are you going to fight, or are you going to be with the family? And I think that that's something that we tend not to think about, right? But the difficulty on every level of taking on a fight like this. I mean, we know, you sort of immediately intuit how brave one must have to be to take on the plutocracy, to take on people who have so much money and power and influence. But, she's so real when she talks about the toll on her body, the toll on her mental health, and the toll on her family life. And she says, when she says that she, was in Australia when you and I were sitting in that courtroom for Ghislaine Maxwell's trial day after day, that she was so frustrated that, her lawyer, Sigra McCauley, she calls Siggy. I thought that was quite fun. Told her, you can't be there because you're a distraction. And I thought it was very interesting that one of the reasons she would be a distraction, her lawyer told her, was because of the names, was because she had named names. And the thought was that the problem is the bold-faced named guys would be called by the defense into the courtroom, and that would get away from this very narrow issue at stake, which was really Ghislaine Maxwell's criminality. And, we've talked about that how narrow the focus really has to be in a trial, and how it was frustrating from our point of view as journalists. We would have loved to have seen the parade of guys come in who were floating around. So I thought that was, really brave, and obviously a tragic foreshadowing of what was to come, because I really felt by the end she was sort of saying, I'm going to keep fighting, but I may not be able to. This, this has taken everything out of me. And so I felt, it was very powerful. And I think the other thing that I thought that was really, really powerful was how she didn't sugarcoat what it was like being in the orbit of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And I thought it was so powerfully described how, she said, look, the reason, because people always say, well, if you were abused, why did you go back? Why did you stay? And I thought what was so revealing and powerful was how she talked about how she hadn't really had a family growing up. And she'd got a dad, and I know that her dad has completely denied the allegations, but in Virginia's telling, he abused her. Her mother was very distant and absent. She was in this sort of program for troubled teens and in foster homes from which she runs away. I mean, in her telling, she was raped from the age of 7.
Right.
And she had no childhood. And so weirdly, one of the reasons she says she stayed, and that yet the abuse, but she was able to compartmentalize the abuse, because if you've been raped since the age of 7, she describes how you just sort of go out of your body. And what she sort of really felt she got in Maxwell and Epstein was, and this was, of course, shows how brilliantly manipulative they were, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and so clever in targeting girls like Virginia, who were vulnerable precisely for this reason. She felt that there was a structure there. She even called, Jeffrey Epstein daddy. And Maxwell at one point, she feels like she's a maternal figure to her, that this is the family she's never had. And that's a very honest and powerful thing to say, because I think, we can all sort of begin to understand why that would seem, on the one hand, so seductive and alluring to someone who's never had that. And then she talks about how she also liked being the number one. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein said, "You're my number one girl." And she, again, she'd never been told that by anyone before. And again, very real how she says when she finally leaves to go to Thailand, yes, she'd wanted to run away. She was getting tired of the control. And obviously the abuse. And yes, the straw was when they asked her to have their baby on the proviso that she'd give it up, sign lots of paperwork to completely give it up. But she also talks about the fact that she also didn't like it that Epstein had by this point bought Nadia Marcinková, or however you say her name, who we know was, one of the 4 women he that was named in the as a carve out in his prosecution deal, and the non-prosecution agreement. He said these 4 women, and she was one of them, and we know because we've talked about this before. He purchased her when she was from Eastern Europe, and Virginia says, she was told to show Nadia what to do in terms of quote unquote massage, and exactly the same way Ghislaine Maxwell had showed Virginia what to do. And she said, she felt she was losing her number one position. She was getting worried. She'd aged out because she was, shock horror, 18. So, there's so much in there, that feels just so authentic and takes the reader on an emotional journey that, I certainly wasn't prepared for. And I know this story inside out. I did think that it was interesting. There's a name in there that of one of the women. I mean, she definitely, I think, did not like Sarah Kellen. And, Sarah Kellen worked for Giuffre. I mean, she's, and like many of his victims turned assistants, turned groomers of other women. I mean, her story is also complicated. And I remember that as we sat through the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, Sarah Kellen's name did come up a lot. And we were all scratching our heads, wondering why it was that she hadn't been indicted with anything.
I believe her name came up in the sentencing proceedings of Ghislaine Maxwell as well in that context. With everything that you say about the emotional life of this book, and it's absolutely gut-wrenching, and she does show how all of this gets normalized starting from her childhood, but there's also with that rigor. She chose an experienced journalist to be her co-author, and even in accusing her father, gets corroboration from other members of the family and has the father's strenuous denial there, and the kind of journey into retaking her power. And even when she, toward the end of the book, she has this explanation. Why does she, for example, describe the former prime minister as the former prime minister and not someone who is well identified in court documents, and I'll name in a moment, but she uses anonymous names, and she says she gives the public a very clear view as to why she's doing that. She says at that point, she's a mother. She knows that the people she's about to name will bankrupt her. And it's very clear. Now, when she accuses the former prime minister, that is a kind of key moment in the book. It's where she sort of understands that she needs to leave because it's so violent and vicious. And as she describes it, bloody. And she says this is someone who I have described as the former prime minister in court documents. Court documents have the only name that I have seen, and you can tell me if you've seen any others, uh, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and
Oh,
that came up.
100%. And he's
100%.
the only, yeah, I mean, I know, I mean, it's not very difficult. I think you and I can name all of them. I mean,
Right.
I know who every one of the unnamed men is. One, and so yes, she didn't want to name them, but they are named in. She did name them in court documents, but I guess that the legally
Wouldn't have
that's
been
different
riskier.
because she named them in a civil litigation that wasn't open to the public
Right.
at the time, from then writing about them in a book. Um, but I think a lot of people must know. I mean, Ehud Barak was the only prime minister, and what she says about him is completely chilling.
Absolutely.
And as was, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein's reaction, and when she goes to him afterwards and said that, this man nearly killed me, choked me. I mean, it was just so utterly horrendous. And Epstein says, "Yeah, well, you'll get that sometimes," and then sends her back. Doesn't tell her. And she, I mean, it was extraordinary that she's with her boyfriend at the time, and Epstein says, "Oh, you need to get on the plane." And the
Right.
plane is for 1 hour. She gets on the plane, and there he is. And I must say, I thought it was interesting that, in her telling, the door gets clipped. I mean, I'm assuming the plane took off, but because the pilots, I remember in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, said they hadn't seen evidence of anything untoward. But in her telling, she and the prime minister were the only people on the plane. And for 60 minutes, she's terrified. She said this time, in fact, he wasn't so bad. But for her, when you've got that mental terror, every second is hell. Then she gets off the plane and goes on with her day.
Right.
No,
There,
I mean, extraordinary. Extraordinary. I did think the other thing that people aren't talking about that certainly raised alarm bells in my head was the person who she was asked to service, for want, who at the same time fondled Jeffrey Epstein.
mm, right. I mean, there was another passage that I found so telling, and it was involving Prince Andrew. And it happened on Epstein's Island. The whole section begins in what she describes as an orgy involving 8 young girls, many of whom didn't speak English, Epstein and Prince Andrew. And that's how she describes this passage. She says she doesn't know when it happened, but she came across later a uh, some court testimony suggesting that there was a flight record that had
Yeah.
happened on July 4th of 2001. And she says around that time she had to go to the hospital and for just whisked by Jeffrey Epstein to a New York hospital. She didn't know what was wrong with her. And she said that she sensed, and this was her words, a gentleman's agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and the doctor. And that that the gentleman's agreement was no one would ask too many questions about what this middle-aged man was doing with this teenager who was sick and in the hospital. And she's told by Epstein in her account here that she had a miscarriage. And this is
Yeah.
all around the time of July 2001. All of it. Although she says she isn't sure about what happened on when the incident at the island was. She says this evidence suggests it was all around July 2001. But forgetting about the obvious news value, both of us have been covering the case involving Prince Andrew for a very long time. This is detail that we haven't, as the public, been exposed to because there was never a trial. There was a giant settlement. The the reason I pointed out the gentleman's agreement, the last time we spoke about Jeffrey Epstein, we were talking about all of the litigation over the banks. And it the act of watching her piece together traces of memory by extrinsic evidence and finding out in retrospect, she says that she looked for the medical records. And though Jeffrey Epstein told her she had a miscarriage and she believes that's what happened, the medical records of that visit do not reflect that. And I think about everything we've seen in some of the other litigation about the structure of there's an allegation that there were sham marriages, that Jeffrey Epstein would get his lawyers and his accountants to do certain things. In this case, an immigration lawyer to arrange sham marriages between two of his victims to keep them in the country. One of whom is foreign, an immigrant to stay in the country, to stay in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. He will arrange a sham marriage, and learning about it through this is detail that she got. She undoubtedly with research from her co-author as well, but also from the fact that she's been, and this is the point I keep coming back to, a dedicated advocate from the moment she decided, I am going to sue Jeffrey Epstein, from the very moment she decided, I'm going to sue Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm going to open this 501c3 in support of other victims, and we're going to keep open lines of communication, and we're going to try and trace memories, and we're not going to name someone before we have the evidence to support in a court of law because they're going to try to destroy us. And someone who is perplexed as to why the Epstein story, and very much a true crime story here, why it has taken so long to emerge and what it has taken for that to emerge. The process of her learning to trust certain journalists, her interactions with Julie K. Brown in the Miami Herald. It's really telling of that journey. It kind of transcends the whole, on one level, it's quite obviously a memoir, and it's deep personal reflections, wrenching reflections, but it also shows that journey. That's the obviously she never lived to see the memoir that she wrote because she died by suicide. And she called herself a survivor. She is not alive anymore. But this is someone, you see what she accomplished, what she overcame, and that's why she's very much, I think one of the chapter titles is talking about the path of the warrior, and that it really took a sustained commitment after a lifetime of tragedy from the very, very difficult childhood. And we sat in the court throughout the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. That is not a unique story. Jeffrey Epstein preyed on the vulnerable again and again. Those were what we heard, and Ghislaine Maxwell as well. That's what we heard from the witnesses. That from there to the quote unquote tough love facility, which was likened very credibly to Lord of the Flies, I believe, in the book, to in the hands of a different sex trafficker before Jeffrey Epstein. That what it took to take that step. That's what I found particularly powerful about the book. That it goes into, and briefly, but still goes into it, her litigation with JP Morgan Bank, right?
Yeah.
That is a part of the story because she is telling something about the process of what it took to confront power. And that was part of that process. And so it has a part in her memoir.
Right. And she does say, again, towards the end, as she's reflecting on all of it. So, I mean, the one cold comfort that I do take from this, she did know, it seems to me, when she died, that this memoir would live. She wasn't going to die without her voice being heard. I mean, that's a strange thing to say, but by the time I got to the last page, I thought, she has finished this book, because what she does say again so powerfully is that telling, if you're going to do this and you're going to tell your story again and again and again, which is what, if you're going to fight in the way that she did, and you're going to fight against the kinds of people that she did, she kind of says, there, people need to understand that you don't tell your story 20 times, 25 times, 30 times without it doing something to you.
Right.
And and that was, by the end, she was sort of saying, this is, it has, I'm having all these victories and my body is failing me.
Mm.
And, I felt, it's very, very, very interesting. When I met Virginia, when I interviewed her for CNN, so it was 2019, and she came in with David Boyes, not Sigrid. I was quite interested to read about the female bonding that they had. I thought that was sort of very heartwarming, actually, as were, by the way, the passages about her children. I thought, that, pictures of domestic normalcy, and her children obviously did bring her great happiness. But now I've lost the train of my thought. I think that I did feel. Yes, the contrast between the vulnerability that on the page where she was saying, I did this, but it may have broken me. And when I think back to 2019, and she came in, and, we did an interview that was being taped for CNN, and she was, she talks about it. She was in performance mode. I mean, she was there, but she wasn't there to talk about how this might be breaking her. She was there to tell her story for the 100th time, because it mattered.
Right.
Because it mattered.
And as a committed advocate. And that's the whole, where I keep coming back to the agency of even in the book's title, Nobody's Girl, right? That it's not,
Yeah.
well, she is taking control, and it's the story of that, how she responds to her mother sending her to the tough love facility, that she said that her mother was right. She was rebellious. She was, and she wished that her mother asked her why. And
Yeah.
it's just you just get this sense of, throughout the book, of a dynamic force and a very uh, committed and engaged person, that it's very little wonder that she became the icon of the movement to bring some accountability
Yeah.
to this.
But
That
she
that
didn't
what
even
it
know.
took to do that.
Well, and the other thing, Adam, that really, tells you how young she was when all of this happened to her. She didn't know. She knew who Prince Andrew was, but all the other guys, finance guys, academics, the prime minister, she had no idea who these people were. And so when she describes how, after the fact, years later, when lawyers have come knocking on her door, when she wants to join the crime victim, Rights Act class action suit, when she knows that there are others out there who are going to fight as well, that she has to actually sort of look at, she goes, oh, that's so and so, and she has to piece together who all these guys were.
Right.
Um, I mean, it tells you how completely vulnerable and naive that she was Play-Doh in their hands.
And that how she was able to reconstruct it, and that how, why is it taking so long to find accountability? Because there are all these pieces of the puzzle, right? I don't think that, yes, of course, Prince Andrew still denies everything. I don't think the size of that settlement wouldn't have happened but for a number of pieces of evidence coming to light that would have caused legal exposure to him. And that happens through investigation to try to make sense of what happened. Hey, there's this photograph. What? And to be able to defend the photograph. There was a time that Prince Andrew tried to dispute the authenticity of the photograph, and he did not by the time of the settlement. He had to answer the complaint, and he never disputed in the complaint the authenticity in his answer to the complaint the authenticity of the photograph. And that sounds like a digression, but I want to emphasize that point. It's the reconstruction of it that you really can sense in the book, that when she is talking about the time that she was rushed to the hospital, looking over the hospital records, trying to figure out the time that something happened by looking at the flight logs. It's why, frankly, Donald Trump also lost the defamation suit that E. Jean Carroll filed, because there was all of the evidence that came during the discovery process. So, in addition to being a memoir about her experiences, it's very much, I would say, also a true crime where as she learns through the litigation that she launched, through her interactions with lawyers and journalists, okay, I didn't know who this person was, but I'm shown that face and I recognize that face, and you're telling me it's that vastly powerful person. It's very illuminating, this book, even if you think you know the broad outlines of many of the things that we're talking about right now to the people who are watching, to see the moment of discovery from the person who experienced it, witnessed it, lived it, was abused in these circumstances, find out, oh, this is how to be able to step forward.
Yes, and fight back.
Right.
Yeah, because I think that, yes, I'm saying that she's very vulnerable, but she's, make no mistake. And obviously, I wish that she hadn't died tragically. And I wish she hadn't taken her own life. But I still think that the book makes it very clear that, Virginia turned the tables on these guys.
Absolutely.
She won this. She really did. And
Right.
it's how to go from being David and beat Goliath. It really is. I mean, it is about finding her power. Um, and learning how, to navigate the court system, and she gets burnt. I mean, you mentioned she forms a bond with Julie Brown, which, yes, but she also talks about sort of being betrayed by Sharon Churcher, the first journalist who comes to get her story. And then she reads something that Sharon Churcher writes in 2014-15, and she's like, ugh, but ugh. So, I mean, she's, again and again and again, Virginia is burnt. I
Right.
mean, she has no reason to trust anybody. And yet she does. And so sad and difficult, yes, but also, I think something that we should all take note of, because it is ultimately a story of winning.
Right. She comes away with a more sophisticated understanding of she wasn't someone who interacted with media. She was not someone who was an icon of anything. Then she is. And that was through a long journey of experience and uh, learning how to reconstruct the events to put the powerful on the defensive and to say, yeah, oh, wait a minute. A journalist, a principal journalist, can get my story out in a way that and may even unearth facts that enhances the public's understanding of the story and builds the case that I've been trying to prove with my lawyers. It's very much a story of her agency, not of her victimhood.
And not quitting them, because not only, was she burnt by Sharon Churchill, she then goes and sits for that interview with ABC News that never airs, with Amy Robach and Gemma Hill. And she keeps going. I mean, it's really, and lots of other things that I think people would be so intimidated by. I was very struck when she flew to Paris to give a deposition against Jean-Luc Brunel. And he found a way to make sure that he was in the room with her and that he sat in front of her and he turned round to her and told her, that she was not only that she was lying, but that he said, I've never met you. I mean, I think, just extraordinary.
Right.
Extraordinary how people lie to themselves, as much as to um, anyone else.
Right.
Um,
And that she was the witness to everything. The fact that
yeah,
Jean-Luc Brunel, French modeling scout, Epstein accomplice, that she has almost uniquely among many Epstein people women and girls who were abused by Epstein. Yes, I'm sure there were others who were abused internationally, and yes, it's a matter of public record that they were abused internationally. Virginia was an uncommonly potent witness to it all, in the way that she articulated, in the way she advocated for it, the fact that she assisted criminal investigations from New York to Paris, and that in her time in Paris assisting that investigation, she has traumatic memories of her abuse by Jeffrey Epstein. Uh,
yeah.
that's why this is, yes, it's a memoir, but it's also something that is illuminating on more than one level. Like, yes, you'll
Well,
get a
and
lot of
actually,
factual information about the Epstein saga, but you'll get much more. You'll
yeah,
understand the evolution of so many survivors in the Epstein story.
right. And one other thing that I was really stunned by, and I thought, wow, amazing that she included this. But good for her for including it, because I think it also tells you something about the scale of the sex pyramid scheme, because that's what it was that, she describes being in Australia, staying up at night to watch the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And she describes how when the fourth witness, Carolyn Andriano, who sadly now is dead, comes in, and Carolyn Andriano very much blamed Virginia on the stand for being the one more than Maxwell, who she said, Virginia brought me in and, Virginia showed me what to do. And Virginia says, I've 100%, I've said, I went out and found girls for Jeffrey Epstein. I've trained girls for Jeffrey Epstein. This is the way this worked. And he made us, through all the ways that he was able to manipulate us. He made us do it.
Right.
Um, But then she says, but I couldn't remember Carolyn.
Mm.
And, my takeaway from that was, I imagine that scene, because that's what I remember feeling when I sat through the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. It felt like the kitchen in Jeffrey Epstein's house was like a thoroughfare where all hours of the day, one girl came in through the door, went up the kitchen, up those awful stairs to the massage room, came down, and then an hour later, someone else came in and went up the stairs and came out the door. And meanwhile, cash is being handed out. And then they're sent off to get their other girls. And when Virginia, and she didn't need to say that. She didn't need to bring any of that up. So for her to say, I couldn't remember that. You're like, wow. I believe, it, and she talks about how when she was, she was doing drugs and she was, but it does sound, and I remember feeling this during the Maxwell trial, that the sheer volume of girls going in and out of that house is something that I think it's very hard for people to get their heads around. Certainly hard for me to get my head around.
Right. And she describes someone saying of her, as she says, that is a child, referring to me, she
Yeah.
says. It's
Yeah.
such an incredible, and it was this line just describing some of, because she doesn't shy away from the kind of details that you describe, and I think the coming to terms uh, with everything, it's very well described and poignantly written.
Yeah. Well, and should we now talk about, because the other thing that around this story that's happened since you and I last week is obviously New York Times big piece on the relationship, on new emails that have been discovered between Jeffrey Epstein and Leon Black.
Mm.
And, Leon Black is somebody Virginia doesn't say that she met, but she obviously, by the end of the book, is keeping an eye on, all the names, all the people. She certainly was paying attention to Leon Black's fall from the top of Apollo when he stepped down, when it emerged that his relationship with Epstein was much closer and he paid him $170 million. For tax advice. But what now that this story gets even stranger, and there's even clearly more to come, because we read in the New York Times how Jeffrey Epstein sent these sort of threatening emails with lots of typos in them to Leon Black, telling him that his children were, and I'm embarrassed to quote, but I'm quoting here, that Leon Black's children were quote unquote retarded, and he also had not particularly nice things to say about Leon Black's sort of personal family office advisors, and said they were all idiots. And he said, in a very threatening and menacing way, I want to be paid $40 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Leon Black's net worth compared to Jeffrey Epstein's net worth is a multiple of something. It's considerable.
Right.
So the question that I have is, why on earth did Leon Black, who would be in a position to tell Jeffrey to get lost, instead turn around and pay the money?
Right. And that's it. Epstein always seemed to believe himself to be and act as the most powerful person in every given environment, whether it was with Les Wexner and with Leon Black. And that's just a constant. I mean, Les Wexner is much, much wealthier than Jeffrey Epstein, arguably sent Jeffrey Epstein into the kind of stratosphere of power for
Yeah.
the first time. And it's the same way too with there's that same fact pattern that Jeffrey Epstein, was the powerful one, not Les Wexner. Jeffrey Epstein, was the powerful one, not Leon Black. And it really does, there hasn't been the definitive answer. There's only what one can assume. And the New York Times, of course, talks about the lawsuits against Leon Black, that accusing him of sexual abuse. Both of them were dismissed. That talks about his entry in the birthday book, which is, like the Trump entry in the
Yes.
birthday book, rude entry. Uh,
Yeah.
and
And by the way, completely complicit
right.
in nodding and winking at what was going on in terms of the girls and yes, I mean, ugh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think there's this to kind of bring the two conversations together in a bit. Um, One person knows the motivation. That's Leon Black. And I think a set of investigators, Senator Ron Wyden, is looking into Leon Black in particular, and he has questioned that. And so, without trying to go into his mind, I will talk about um, Virginia Giuffre's answer to the question, or examination of a theory. I don't think she answered it. Of A lot of people say, "Oh, were these powerful people blackmailed?" And she kind of uh, gives a sly evasion to that question, but she points out in a footnote. Which goes to my point, folks. This is a heavily researched book by her and her journalist co-author. You will learn a lot about this. And she pointed out an article that you and I are aware of, but I doubt the broader public is aware of, that the Wall Street Journal has. They broke the story some time ago of the first on the record confirmation of an act of blackmail by Jeffrey Epstein. And Bill Gates personally accused Jeffrey Epstein of using leverage, namely of the fact that Bill Gates was having an affair with, I believe, a Russian chess player.
Mm,
Um,
exactly.
and that he was going to expose it didn't use the word blackmail. I think other stories about this called it what it is, sexual blackmail. And it wasn't over anyone who was trafficked to Bill Gates. It happened to
No,
be his sexual affair. Um, but that is, none of the theories as to why people acted the way they did has been confirmed on the record. And but we do know for a fact, that particular theory, whether it is scalable, is true in at least one documented
yes,
incident. He tried to leverage Bill Gates's affair to get Bill Gates to enter into a deal that he wanted. So it's so that is something that Virginia Giuffre, although she didn't, she remarked that yes, he had cameras all over the place, and we observed that. I don't know if that was a thing. And in a footnote, we do know this happened, however.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so
And she does say, I
I
think,
won't guess, but it's a dynamic. It's a dynamic that
sure.
is definitely again and again.
And Virginia does say, somewhere, she does quote Jeffrey saying something, I'm paraphrasing, like, well, it's always good to have material on people. And let's not forget, what did he do to her? He showed her photographs of her brother, right? In other words, he said to Virginia, by the way, sort of smiling, you don't want anything to happen to your brother, and that, and then it showed her a picture so yes, you know, follow the dots. But I will say this, Adam, that there was one phrase that Epstein used in his email to Leon Black. And of course, we didn't see any of the Leon Black emails back to Jeffrey Epstein, so we don't know. But that really put question marks into my head, where he said to Leon, you've been quote unquote safe financially, or financially safe. And the only reason I thought that was a strange choice of language was, for someone like of that wealth, you would assume they're beyond worrying about their financial safety.
Mm.
And it just, again, it just raised question marks in my mind. I don't have any good answers for you. But we'll wait to see. I hope Ron White, he's doing stellar work in this department. I mean, the genesis of Apollo, the firm founded by Leon Black, is interesting. I mean, people forget this, but Leon, before Apollo was founded in the flames of Mike Milken's firm, which is where, and Mike Milken worked with Leon Black. And obviously Milken went to jail. But the in some ways Apollo has murky origins. So anyway, I have no idea if that matters in any meaningful way, but I did think it was a strange choice of words. So we shall see. Moving on. I'm now going to ask you. I mean, there's as you always, never a dull moment. Is the DOJ likely to pay Donald Trump the 40 something million he's asking for in damages for what was done to him?
I will never underestimate this DOJ's shamelessness.
Right.
Look, this is the very proposition that Trump needs to be compensated for a couple of criminal court cases about his retention of classified documents that he refused to return to the government while asked to, and another for trying to overturn an election that he lost, is insulting. The idea that he will have to have taxpayers compensate him $230 million for those investigations into those crimes, allegedly to be put to charity, aka his pet projects. It's insulting, but the issue will go to his own former lawyer, Todd Blanche, who's now the Deputy Attorney General, who might be reviewing this deal, or the other former defense lawyer who's on top of the Justice Department. The one thing I will say about it, I live in, we're both New Yorkers. Very recently, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, current U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton, just defended that on CNBC when asked about that, and seemed to suggest that there was a big failure in the legal community for failing to speak up about the Trump criminal investigations and prosecutions. And people weren't failing to speak up. The legal community thought that these were just and righteous cases. There was Bill Barr, no less than Bill Barr, his former very pliant attorney general, thought that the allegations against him in the espionage case over the retention of classified documents were serious. He's someone who's fairly prominent in the legal community and not someone who is, a quote unquote Trump hater. And all of us saw what happened on January 6th and everything that led up to it. The farcical, if it weren't so destructive, attempts to overturn the election, and the real attack on our democracy, which will take many generations to repair, if at all. The $230 million bid to negotiate with the government he leads to take that much money that the taxpayers pay is an outrage and an insult.
Let me ask you this. Does the DOJ make reparations to citizens? I mean, is there any precedent? I mean, if you just remove for the fact that he's the president and this is his Justice Department, what happens? Are there instances of people who've been wrongly or they believe unfairly prosecuted by the government?
Sure, the Central Park Five, the exonerated five by the state of New York. That's not the federal government. When the government mistreats you and sends you to jail for no
Jail.
reason, you can bring a case by a government that you don't lead and
And
against people you can't strong arm, for a demand of money that isn't outrageous and is called
right,
upon by a judge and jury. To say I'm having arm's length negotiation with my former criminal defense lawyer, uh,
right.
that for this for
Yeah, yeah,
close
yeah,
to a
yeah.
$250 million. In concept, can someone who, unlike Trump, was unjustly, wrongly targeted for by the federal government, can they seek compensation? Uh, yes, they could, and the Central Park Five, who Donald Trump still vilifies to this day, and
Right,
claims that they are guilty of rape, despite the fact that they have been exonerated by DNA evidence. Um, he's still smearing them, despite the fact that they have been exonerated through the system and through the civil process, through a process that they, unlike Trump, had no control over. They are
yeah, yeah. And they,
negotiating
and
against
they, and they went
themselves.
to jail for years.
They went to jail for years. And, the upshot of the criminal prosecution, Trump was elected president again. And he also has, and he also, uh, there's more information about his attempt to subvert a Democratic election in 2020 as a result of the prosecution. It unveiled embarrassing information, but I don't think that's a redressable wrong for him.
Got it.
I don't know, but it just obviously I'm being a little uh, the. It just seemed there's so many things that are so flagrant that uh, you look at the James Comey case and the Letitia James case, and you can review the indictment and we can go through the allegations of it. Um, there, there are certain acts that are just so shameless when you hollow out the prosecutor's office,
Right,
staff it with your former lawyer to make the case happen. That's something that is on its face unjust. And I don't think his criminal cases, he hasn't begun to show any evidence that anything like that happened regarding.
right, right. So what's happened on some of the other things we talked about last week? Is there a move to remove Patrick Fitzgerald, James Comey's attorney? Did I read that somewhere?
Right. Yeah. I think that as a matter of fact, I think Patrick Fitzgerald referred to I think that it was construed what Lindsay Halligan was doing as trying to disqualify him and oust him. I think there's some sort of question about that, but they are he responded to claims about his handling of certain information as essentially defamatory. And it seems like the judge has taken some steps um, to just swat that aside, the claims of the government. that case will come to a head soon. I imagine there's another judge who has been assigned the disqualification motion um, to get Lindsay Halligan off the case. We'll see what happens there. We've seen the motion filed by James Comey for vindictive and selective prosecution. That'll work its way. And this week on Friday, we'll have uh, the arraignment of New York Attorney General Letitia James, who just today, by the way, uh, opened a portal for New Yorkers who to show videos of ICE authority misconduct after the raids yesterday and the Chinatown vendors.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting split screen. She's going to be arraigned in court in, I believe, Norfolk, Virginia, rather than Alexandria on Friday, and standing up right now still, even under the pressure with all that, um, is essentially commissioning the public to fight the immigration agenda of the administration just days before that corporate matchup.
Right. Well, of course, given, I mean, were Trump to win $240 million, I'm now getting ahead of myself and ahead of the legal. It'd be interesting to see what James Comey and Letitia James might sue. I
Right.
mean, here's
Well,
the
the
thing
thing
about
is, yeah. I mean, he's not, as I understand, so the cases are in the courts. They can negotiate it any way they want. I wonder to what extent a judge will scrutinize it
right.
um, but I don't believe that there's very little discretion a judge has. What he's trying to do is negotiate
Go
with
around.
himself.
Yes.
And he's said it himself. He's said that he's negotiating against himself and that it looks bad. Yeah, absolutely it does. So
Yeah. Any other big legal cases in the news you wanna you want to chat about?
I think we
We've done
covered
it.
things pretty broadly.
We've been on for an hour. So
Yeah, I mean, on an Epstein, just in brief, on an Epstein-related case, you have the fact that uh, Congresswoman-elect Rajalva has her lawsuit to force Speaker Johnson to swear her in and be the deciding vote on
yeah,
the petition to discharge that could release these Epstein files. That happened yesterday. So I would look out for that. There's plenty more, but I think we've run the gamut on many topics. There's of
awesome.
course ongoing litigation over the National Guard, ICE deployments in Chicago. We could go down the list, but I think we've been pretty comprehensive.
Awesome. Awesome, Adam. As always, it's a pleasure. I always
Yes,
learn
always a pleasure,
so
Vicky.
much. Thank you. And thank you everyone for sorry we were a little late.
And
But we did it.
if you missed any part of this, you can find the archives of this on Vicky's website, Vicky Ward Investigates, and my website, All Rise News. You can subscribe at the top left of the screen to both of our pages right now. And till next time, Vicky.
Bye, Adam. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Bye bye.